Hey guys, tonight we step through the velvet corridors of Versailles, where chandeliers flicker above silk-clad schemas and the air smells faintly of orange blossoms, beeswax, and something less pleasant, something like scorched herbs and old secrets. You follow the scent, half floating, half eavesdropping, and realize this palace isn't just about powdered wigs and champagne. It's about power, and power, here, can be lethal. It's 17th century France, and behind the gleaming mirrors and royal proclamations, the court of Louis XIV is a gilded trap. One wrong glance, one foolish word, and you're out. Or worse, dead. The king, resplendent in brocade and sunlight metaphors, is unknowingly perched atop a spider's web of seduction, superstition, and poison. And it's not the generals or ministers you need to watch. It's the women, the ones closest to him, the ones whispering in the dark. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you are. I always love seeing who's still awake with me. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're gliding down a hall lined with mirrors. Each step reflects not just your figure, but 100 other ghostly silhouettes, trailing lace and secrets. Versailles gleams. Yes, but this isn't daylight Versailles. This is night. The hour of candlelit corridors and silk rustling like wind through grass. The courtiers have left their official smiles behind and now sip secrets like wine. You hover near the salons, where powdered faces laugh just a little too loudly. A duchess dabs her upper lip with a lace handkerchief, not from heat but nerves. Her companion, someone's younger mistress, probably, eyes her glass of claret just a little too long before taking a sip. You notice that, don't you? That half-second hesitation, as if she's weighing something invisible in it. The palace is full of perfumes, but one smell keeps rising, like burnt sugar and fennel. Someone once said you could smell poison. That's probably nonsense. But here, where perfume and poison both come in crystal vials, who's to say? You pass a statue of Apollo, golden and glorious, mimicking the Sun King himself. Louis XIV is obsessed with control. His court etiquette is a machine, ticking like clockwork. Courtiers wake and sleep by the king's schedule. Meals, walks, even childbirths are public. But in a place where everything is seen, it's what's unseen that rules. Behind the flattery, behind the curtsies and carefully orchestrated laughter, there's a storm building. You don't hear it at first. It's more of a prickling in your spine, a growing hum of paranoia. But soon enough, it'll roar. By now, you've probably heard of the affair of the poisons. Or maybe you haven't. It doesn't get the same Netflix dramatizations as Henry VIII or Marie Antoinette. But it should, because this wasn't just a scandal, it was an epidemic. Between 1677 and 1682, dozens of nobles were arrested. Fortune tellers, alchemists, even priests were dragged into the fold. Accusations ranged from petty jealousy to satanic rites and ritual baby sacrifice. You know, the usual Versailles drama. One of the king's most beloved mistresses, Madame de Montespan, would find herself caught in the swirl. But we're not quite there yet. For now, you linger in these stifling rooms, with candlelight bouncing off gold leaf walls and gossip thicker than the powdered wigs. Historically, this period marked a transformation in Louis XIV's reign. Versailles had just become the official seat of court. The Fronde, that messy civil war from his youth, still haunted him. So Louis built Versailles to centralize power, to contain the nobility, to control them with ceremony and distraction. It worked brilliantly. But when you cram that many ambitious people into one glittering cage, they either sing or bite. And many were biting. discreetly. A little pinch of arsenic here, a dash of powdered toad there. Poison, after all, was the perfect aristocratic weapon. Invisible, quiet, deniable. No need for swords or jewels. Just a teaspoon and patience. One strange footnote historians like to debate involves a courtier named Madame de Brinvilliers, who predated the main scandal. She was convicted in 1676 of poisoning her father and two brothers, allegedly testing poisons on hospital patients beforehand. Lovely, right? She was tortured, executed, and posthumously became a sort of morbid inspiration. Her trial arguably laid the groundwork, socially and judicially, for the paranoia to come. Some scholars argue the affair of the poisons was just a convenient political purge dressed up in occult nonsense. Others insist the threat was real, perhaps exaggerated, but not imaginary. Historians still argue whether the poison network was truly organized or simply a messy mosaic of desperate individuals and dirty secrets. And what a mosaic it was. You drift past the Hall of Mirrors now, stepping into the private apartments, smaller, darker, but no less dangerous. In these rooms, lovers are made and unmade. Bottles are exchanged with hushed instructions, and behind every compliment lies a calculation. Every night, the courtiers perform the ritual of the coucher du roi, the royal bedtime. Louis receives intimate visitors, selected like dishes on a banquet menu. But even the king's affections are prey to court maneuvering. A misplaced powder puff, a subtle potion in a goblet, a whispered slander from a jealous rival. It's all part of the game. You wonder, briefly, how anyone slept here at all. You pass by a lady's chamber. Her mirror is still fogged from a warm bath. You spot a charm tied in silk, tucked behind the dressing table. A protection spell, or a love charm. Either way, she doesn't trust her perfume alone to hold the king's eye. And she's not the only one. That fear, that she might lose her place, her power, her king, will drive some to fortune tellers, others to alchemists, and a few to something worse. You'll meet them soon enough. But for now, you drift gently back to the golden center of it all. The place where beauty hides rot, where lace sleeves conceal trembling wrists, where the court dreams by day and schemes by night. You follow the sunlight now, soft, hunted, indifferent, as it glides through high windows and rests upon the figure of a man who has declared himself the son. Louis XIV doesn't merely rule France. He embodies it. At least, that's what he tells himself, and everyone else, for that matter. You stand among the crowd as he walks the garden paths of Versailles. Every step a performance, every gesture curated for awe. It's breathtaking, really, and exhausting. You watch him receive courtiers with the same polished ease as he receives ambassadors and generals. His smile is rehearsed, yes, but charming nonetheless. He is magnetic, impossibly so. It's no wonder that women orbit him like moths to a rather judgmental flame. They study his mood, memorize his habits, and in the case of a few, dabble in the darker arts to ensure he never looks away. Louis isn't blind to the competition, his affection stays. He enjoys it, in fact. A man surrounded by power-hungry women, each beautiful, clever, and merciless in her own way, and all of them vying not just for his touch, but for a kind of immortality. If you could become the king's favorite, you weren't just a lover, you were nearly untouchable. But affection at Versailles is currency, and currency, as you probably guessed, is something people are willing to kill for. Take Madame de la Valliere, the sweet one. She was young, pious, and so overwhelmed by court life that she would regularly faint during royal ceremonies. Not ideal. She won the king's heart early, almost by accident, and for a while, she held it, but not tightly enough, because then came Madame de Montespan, And Montespan, well, Montespan doesn't faint. Montespan orchestrates. You hear her before you see her. Laughter like crystal clinking in a glass of blood orange cordial. She enters a room and somehow occupies all of it. Curves, wit, poetry, venom, and politics wrapped in silk the color of bruised plums. Everyone talks about her. Everyone watches her, including the Queen. And Louis. Louis is bewitched. But that's the thing. Some at court begin to wonder if he's bewitched literally. Montespan is not just beautiful. She's cunning. She befriends the king's ministers, seduces his enemies, and makes sure no rival goes unnoticed. If a duchess smiles too sweetly at Louis, Montespan's smile sharpens. If a new lady-in-waiting is prettier than expected, Montespan arranges a luncheon, with seating carefully plotted for humiliation. You trail behind her as she floats through the gardens, fanning herself with a gesture that feels both casual and calculated. She is everything, and she knows how quickly it can disappear. Because at Versailles, favor is fickle. A sudden illness, a letter gone missing, a subtle shift in the king's gaze. Blink, and you're gone. And Montespan has no intention of blinking. Which brings us to the shadow that begins to spread behind her, the one no candle can push back. Rumors start, soft as slippers on marble, that she's not merely enchanting, but enchanted. That her midnight prayers might not be addressed to the same saints the Queen favors. Now, you're not surprised. You've felt the chill in this palace before, but this time, it's personal. Because if Montespan really is dabbling in something dark, she isn't the only one. The court is thick with whispered rituals and mystical prescriptions. Everyone wants love, or revenge, or just one more chance to be seen. Historians still argue whether Louis ever suspected what was happening just beyond his satin-draped walls. He certainly knew his mistresses didn't always play fair, but magic, that would imply he wasn't in control, and the Sun King would never admit that. Here's your quirky fringe fact of the evening. Many nobles at the time carried small charm sachets, hidden in their bodices or boots, filled with dried herbs and other questionable materials. Rabbit's foot, standard. Crushed emerald, why not? A pinch of powdered mummy, tragically common. You pass a valet carefully placing one such sachet beneath a pillow, not his own. Another servant watches, frowning. There's a silent understanding between them. No one will speak of this. Not yet. Meanwhile, Louis goes on dancing. Literally, every evening. There are balls, operas, plays, most starring Louis himself. Is still young, still dazzling. He's the sun, and who would suspect the sun of being vulnerable? But the thing about the sun is it casts shadows, and this court is full of them. One begins near the Queen's chapel, where a priest notices attendance is inconsistent. Another rises near the stables, where a groom finds a bouquet wrapped in ribbon and animal bones. You weren't expecting that bouquet to come back, were you? Soon, people start whispering about the cowardice miracles, a nickname for the seedy underbelly of Paris, where fortune tellers sell spells and poisons, and where those fallen from grace pretend to be blind or maimed to beg more convincingly. You won't visit it yet, but you feel its breath on your neck. Because some of the king's ladies, yes, those same powdered, jewel-draped ornaments, have been making quiet trips into town. Carriage wheels roll at midnight. Footmen are paid to forget. And as Montespan climbs higher in Louis's heart, more people start looking for ways to bring her down. You notice it first in the Queen's eyes. Marie Therese rarely speaks out, but she watches. She endures. Her face never moves when rumors swirl, but her fingers clutch her rosary harder now. A prayer for protection or judgment. You leave her in her chapel and follow the rustle of silk through the king's inner chambers. Montespan is there already, of course. She always is. perfumed, glittering, her fan painted with a scene from Greek mythology. Probably something dramatic involving betrayal and gods turning into swans. You lean in close as she whispers something into Louis's ear. He laughs, but for the first time, you think you see a flicker of something behind his eyes. Unease, doubt, just gas. Hard to say, but it's there. You follow the trail of rosewater and ambition deeper now, past the polished salons and perfume guards, into the private empire of Madame de Montespan. Her chambers are everything Versailles promises. Mirrors the size of small lakes, tapestries woven with myth, and a bed that could comfortably host a minor orchestra. But it's not the gold leaf or embroidered silks that catch your eye tonight. It's what's missing. The crucifix. There's none on her wall. It's subtle, but in a palace obsessed with appearances, absence often screams louder than presence. And if Madame de Montespan's outward show is perfection, then perhaps something inward has gone askew. You watch as she leans over her vanity, surrounded by potions labeled in curling script. Eau de Venus, Essence de Cyrene, Sang de Colombe. You don't need a degree in early modern pharmacology to know none of this came from the royal apothecary. She dips a finger in one vial, syrupy and golden, and applies it behind her ears. Love potion, anti-aging elixir, or maybe just fancy sugar water. But the look in her eyes as she does it, that's belief. Or desperation. Madame de Montespan's rise to power wasn't just luck and good cheekbones. It was engineered with the precision of a clockmaker. She studied Louis's moods, timed her entrances, knew when to flatter and when to provoke. She read poetry. She wrote plays. She whispered Latin just well enough to sound mysterious and not enough to be understood. And she loved power as fiercely as some love people. But love is slippery at Versailles. The king's heart is crowded. There are new faces arriving at court. Fresher, softer, more modest. The kind of girls who make a man feel morally superior for choosing them. Montespan watches them with a smile that never quite touches her eyes. She starts changing her tactics. Less biting wit, more sighs. Fewer dramatic entrances, more fragile glances. You notice her praying more. At least, that's what she calls it. But you've already seen the sachets. You've already smelled the herbs. And one night, you catch her slipping out, cloaked and alone. You follow. She doesn't go far, just to a small salon near the edge of the palace, one used mostly by servants and overlooked guests. There, waiting in the shadow of a fireplace, is a figure with a scarf covering most of her face. She produces a small box. Something passes between them. Money, words, warnings. You can't hear it, but you feel it. Later, you'll learn her name. Catherine Monvoisin. La Voisin. But that's still to come. For now, you return to Montespan's chamber. She's back before you, already lounging with a volume of The Amorous Shepherd in one hand and a glass of something dark in the other. She hums a lullaby to herself. Soft, repetitive. It's a nursery tune. But she has no children nearby. Well, none that are still living here. You recall that by now. Montespan had borne the king several children. And that's no small feat at Versailles, where pregnancy could be political suicide unless handled just right. She managed it. Somehow, Louis legitimized them, built houses for them, called them blessings. But behind every royal cradle is a wet nurse who talks too much and a servant who remembers too clearly. Here's a curious detail. One of Montespan's children was reportedly stillborn during a carriage ride. The story is vague, the servants tight-lipped. Historians still argue whether this event was natural or encouraged. The timeline is strange. The silence afterward, even stranger. You won't find it in official records, but you might overhear it in a laundry room or whispered through a keyhole. And now, with the king's gaze drifting toward a new favorite, Madame de Maintenon. Montespan starts to panic. Maintenon is pious, dry as toast, and somehow unthreatening enough to be dangerous. She doesn't compete. She just waits. And Louis, suddenly keen on morality, convenient timing, finds her soothing. Montespan. She starts praying harder. Or so she says. You find her one night kneeling beside her bed, but she's not clutching a rosary. She's drawing symbols on parchment, letters in a language no convent taught. She burns the paper in a silver bowl. The smoke curls like a serpent, and for a moment you swear the room shivers. You shift slightly and knock over a small vial. It spills across a note. Half a sentence remains. Something about reconquering what was stolen. The ink smears into a bruise-colored puddle. Oh, and here's your quirky tidbit. Montespan reportedly wore an amulet containing dried bat blood. Not confirmed, but let's be honest, it tracks. Around this time, court gossip begins to sharpen. Whispers of black masses float through the salons. Supposedly, Montespan is seen with a former priest, an excommunicated one. Others say she keeps a woman with no tongue locked in a back room to help her conduct rituals. Again, no evidence. But you try not to blink when you hear a muffled sob from the corridor one night. Louis, for his part, pretends not to hear any of it. Is busy commissioning fountains, composing ballet steps, and waging war on the Dutch. But sometimes, late at night, you catch him alone in the Hall of Mirrors, just thinking, a rare moment of stillness. You wonder if he's thinking of Montespan, of their children, of the letters he never sent, or perhaps of the smell of burnt paper lingering under her perfume. And still, Versailles carries on. The music plays, the candles flicker, the powdered dancers twirl, but underneath all that elegance, you can feel it. Something's shifting. A new name is being whispered more often. Not Maintenon, not Montespan, Lavoisin. You'll meet her soon. For now, sleep with one eye open. You find yourself in Paris now, though not the part immortalized in paintings. Not the elegant boulevards or cathedral spires. This is the underbelly, the marrow. The streets are damp, the air close with rotten ambition, and lanterns hang like tired eyes above crooked alleyways. You move quietly, glancing over your shoulder, though no one really looks at you. They are all busy bartering, begging, or muttering to themselves. This is the city's midnight market, not for bread or silk, but for power. The kind you don't advertise. A hunched woman stays a pot near the curb. You catch a whiff, rosemary, clove, and something iron. She grins at you, showing teeth like cracked porcelain. She's not just cooking, she's brewing. You pass a small doorway with a black cloth hung in place of a door. Inside, a client whispers his enemy's name over a bundle of hair. The fortune teller dips the bundle in a dark tincture and mutters something in Latin, or possibly just bad Italian with flair. It doesn't matter. The man leaves convinced. And that's the point. The poison trade, you realize, isn't built on ingredients. It's built on faith and hope, often in the same vial. This is where Catherine Monvoisin, La Voisin, thrives. You meet her in a dim parlor that smells like crushed violets and old blood. Her face is heavily powdered, her sleeves embroidered with protective symbols. A mix of apothecary, midwife, sorceress, and gossip broker. She is the most feared woman in Paris, and probably the most profitable. She offers services, yes, but more than that, she offers solutions. Unwanted husband, she has something for that. Difficult pregnancy, no problem. Want to win someone's heart? I'll burn it out. There's a powder, a potion, a prayer. Everything has a price. And La Voisin keeps no accounts, just memories. You wouldn't call her warm. But she has a way of looking at people that suggests she already knows what they've done. By this time, her network has grown vast. Alchemists, former monks, street witches, even a few nuns. Everyone has a role. Some mix the poisons. Some distribute them. Some perform the rituals. And others, the most well-paid, keep their mouths shut. You peek at her ledgers, hidden under floorboards, of course. Names upon names. Nobles, mistresses, midwives. Some crossed out, some underlined. A few with small wax seals beside them. That can't be good. And yes, Montespan's name is there. Historians still argue whether Montespan truly believed in La Voisin's power or simply saw her as one more political tool. What we do know is this: Montespan paid her, repeatedly, for aphrodisiacs, for prayers, and, if the darker rumors hold any truth, for black masses conducted in secret, complete with unholy rites designed to bind the king's heart. You don't want to believe it, but the details are oddly consistent across sources. The presence of a defrocked priest named Etienne Gibor, the ritual performed on a naked altar, the offering of blood. Whether any of it worked is anyone's guess. But Montespan stayed powerful for years, long after many others had faded. So, interpret that as you will. Here's your quirky fringe detail. One of the most popular love powders La Voisin sold was called powder de succession, a delicate euphemism for poison strong enough to speed up inheritance timelines, if you catch the drift. Clients liked it because it didn't smell like anything, or so they said. The court, of course, has no idea. Not yet. While Versailles waltzes through another season of theater and tournaments, Paris is quietly becoming a hive of vendettas. The wealthy come in cloaks. The desperate arrive in tears. And La Voisin welcomes them all. You sit in on a consultation. A minor noblewoman, young, clearly terrified, pulls up her skirts just enough to reveal bruises. Her husband, she says, is cruel. La Voisin listens, nods, offers a small vial with a mother-of-pearl stopper. Just a few drops, she says, in his wine, every other day. He'll grow weaker, then quiet. The girl pays in coins, plus a garnet ring. Then she leaves. You never see her again. You never see the husband either. Sometimes, it's that simple, but not always. Some customers don't want death. They want love. And here, La Voisin's market gets murkier. Aphrodisiacs made from Spanish fly, powdered pearl, and occasionally, less savory things. You hear one woman request a potion brewed from grave date and milk teeth. You try not to ask questions. And then there are the relics, rings, strands of hair, bits of clothing stolen from the target. You wonder if Montespan ever snipped a piece from one of Louis's elaborate cuffs, or plucked a hair from his pillow. Seems likely. She was thorough. La Voisin doesn't just deal in bottles. She offers ceremonies, rituals conducted in abandoned chapels or underground cellars. Sometimes alone, sometimes with other clients watching. Like theater, if theater involved more Latin and fewer violins. You see one from a hidden corner. A woman kneels as a defrocked priest chants, his voice flat and bitter. An infant's cry echoes, then stops. The woman faints. Someone catches her. You turn away before the candlelight flickers too low. That night, you walk back toward the river, shaken. The Seine looks calmer than usual, moonlight glittering across its black surface. But you know what lies beneath. Bones, bottles, secrets. Eventually, people begin to notice. A rash of sudden deaths among minor nobles. A few suspicious miscarriages. A servant who talks too much and disappears. The police begin quietly compiling names. Paris isn't Versailles. There are consequences here. Even for the beautiful. Even for the rich. La Voisin remains untouchable. for now. But something is shifting. She can feel it, and so can you. Because Montespan is getting nervous. And nervous women at court are the most dangerous kind. You slip back into the palace. But something feels colder now. Not in temperature, exactly. It's more like the mirrors have stopped reflecting properly. Like the candles flicker just a beat too slow. Versailles hasn't changed, but you have. After walking the back streets of Paris and brushing shoulders with poisoners, you start to notice the rut beneath the ribbons. And nowhere is that rut more unsettling than in the whisper of two words. Black Mass. You don't want to believe it. Not really. It sounds theatrical, like something from a pulp novel or a bored bishop's fever dream. But in late 17th century France, there are nobles who absolutely do believe in it. Some for spiritual reasons, some for reasons that rhyme with inheritance, and some because they'll try anything to make him, the king, stay. Madame de Montespan, by now, is deep into both paranoia and performance. She still dazzles, of course, still wears gowns embroidered with gold thread, still delivers Bob compliments with a velvet purr. But behind closed doors, her hands tremble when she thinks no one is watching. You are. Tonight, she's left Versailles again. Not alone. A servant follows, carrying a long black satchel. The carriage turns away from the polished roads and moves toward an old hunting lodge, disused and mostly forgotten. The perfect kind of forgotten. You follow through the trees. The wind hisses through the branches like an audience anticipating the curtain. Inside the lodge, the air is thick with the scent of tallow candles, iron, and crushed lavender, struggling to mask something more. Cuppery. A priest is already there. Not one you'd see at Versailles. This one is older, pale, with eyes that don't blink quite enough. Etienne Gibor. Defrocked, disgraced, and seemingly unbothered by either fact. He prepares the altar, only it isn't really an altar. It's a table, draped in black cloth, surrounded by herbs and bowls and things you'd rather not identify. And on the table lies a woman, naked, still, arms crossed over her chest like she's already halfway to being a saint or a corpse. Montespan steps forward. She speaks softly, repeating a prayer. But it's not in Latin, and it's certainly not one taught at convent school. Gibor begins chanting. The woman on the table does not move. The flames flicker wildly now, though no wind enters the room, and you, standing in the shadow, suddenly feel colder than you've ever felt. They say that during these black masses, prayers were offered not to God, but to the devil, or, depending on the version you believe, to more ambiguous spirits of influence. The goal? To bind the king. Body, mind, affection. To keep him from leaving. Or perhaps, to punish him for already drifting. Some say there were sacrifices. Others say the rites were symbolic. Historians still argue whether actual infants were harmed, or whether the stories were sensationalized to ensure public outrage when the trials began. The truth probably lives somewhere in the gray. Like most things here. What is certain is this: someone saw something. Maybe a servant. Maybe a guest with a conscience. Maybe a rival with an agenda. But someone talked. And suddenly, the delicate curtain shielding Montespan from suspicion begins to fray. La Voisin, back in Paris, continues conducting her ceremonies. The Black Mass becomes an open secret among her wealthiest clients. But she's growing careless, or maybe just too powerful. When you believe yourself untouchable, you stop wiping the blood off the silver. And then a woman named Marguerite Monvoisin, yes, her daughter, mentions a name she shouldn't during a drunken argument. A noble name, a royal one. Investigators perk up. Montespan, still unaware that her web is beginning to unravel, doubles down. More appointments, more powders, more midnight visits. If she's worried, she doesn't show it, except in her increasingly aggressive treatment of rivals. She begins spreading rumors about Madame de Maintenon, the king's newer flame. That she's dull, that she smells like cabbage, that she's planning to poison the queen and marry Louis herself. That last one hits a little too close to irony. Here's your quirky tidbit for this chapter. During one alleged black mass, Montespan was said to have handed Gabor a written prayer asking the spirits to torment the king with love for her, and to make all other women seem repulsive to him. She signed it, of course, because nothing says subtle like a written hex with a monogram. Back at court, the atmosphere has shifted. The jokes are a little sharper, the compliments more laced with fear. Everyone senses something is wrong, but no one wants to name it yet, except maybe Madame de Maintenon. Her calm presence has grown more confident. She walks a little straighter, stays longer in the king's chambers, wears rosary beads openly and prays audibly, just in case anyone was wondering whether she's the devil's pen pal. She isn't, but she's very aware someone else might be. Louis remains publicly devoted to Montespan, but privately, he hesitates now. He's older, wiser, less easily impressed by theatrics. He begins to ask quiet questions, to glance longer at reports, to delay decisions involving his once beloved mistress. He hasn't confronted her yet. That would be uncomfortable, and Louis hates discomfort almost as much as he hates ugly ceilings. But the court can tell, and so can you. You walk through the hall of mirrors again, but this time the reflections don't flatter. They show a woman desperate to keep what's slipping, a king beginning to regret his youth, and a palace teetering on the edge of something darker than politics. Because once you invite something into your soul, whether love, poison, or spirits, it rarely leaves quietly. You return to Paris, though you're not exactly eager. The air here has thickened, grown denser with fear. You can feel it before you even step into the shadows of La Voisin's townhouse. What once seemed like a clever little enterprise now hums with menace. Something's changed. She knows it. So do you. Inside, the curtains are drawn even during daylight. Servants tiptoe. Doors creak open, but never stay that way long. La Voisin sits in her usual place, straight-backed, powdered, regal in the way a spider might be regal from the center of its web. She's been doing this for years, and she's good at it. Her network stretches across Paris like ivy, creeping into boudoirs, abbeys, military barracks, and, crucially, Versailles itself. She doesn't poison anyone. She simply facilitates. She is the middlewoman of misery, the concierge of catastrophe. You want your brother gone, your mistress in love, your stomach not full of shame and unwanted consequences. There's a price list, and business has never been better, or more dangerous, because the authorities have started watching. Not loudly. Louis doesn't want a scandal unless it can be scripted, but carefully. In secret, the Lieutenant General of Police, Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie, has launched an investigation, not into witchcraft, officially, but into the death toll creeping higher than expected. Noble deaths, quiet ones, unexplained. You feel the pressure building. La Voisin feels it too. She doesn't slow down. In fact, she works faster. Clients still arrive, noble women in hooded cloaks, priests with darting eyes, midwives carrying baskets that don't contain bread. La Voisin receives them all with her usual calm. But behind her eyes now is calculation, not charm, survival. She begins burning records, but not all of them. You glimpse a few that survive. Lists of clients, notes on ingredients, sketches of rituals. One page, folded 3 times, contains a name in large, looping script. Athenaeus de Montespan. You're not surprised, but you are concerned. Because Montespan isn't a client. She's the client. She's the reason the house is still standing, the reason servants get paid. If she falls, La Voisin falls too. And that's not a gamble anyone wants to take. Not even La Voisin, who once told a baron's mistress she could make someone forget how to breathe with just a powder and a word. Here's your quirky tidbit. La Voisin reportedly kept a private garden where she grew herbs not commonly used in cooking, unless your recipe book had chapters on love that lasts and disappearances the authorities can't prove. The garden was hidden behind high walls, but children in the neighborhood swore it moaned at night. Or maybe that was just Paris being Paris. But let's talk numbers for a second. By this point in the affair of the poisons, authorities estimate that over 400 people were involved, either as clients, suppliers, witnesses, or casualties. Some say closer to 2,500. That's not a scandal. That's a subculture. The king still knows nothing publicly. But Louis is no fool. He's been told in whispers that something foul is wafting up from Paris. And though he may find Montespan's affection familiar, even comforting, he's also aware of the rumors, especially those involving rituals performed over his name. That he cannot tolerate. So, he gives the order, dig deeper, quietly, and that's when La Voisin starts to sweat. She increases the secrecy of her meetings, moves locations, sends intermediaries, uses code names. But one mistake is all it takes. A woman, not high-born, but desperate, gets caught trying to bribe a servant to add something to her husband's stew. A small arrest, barely noticed. But the woman talks. She gives names. Dozens. And one of them is La Voisin. Suddenly, things move fast. La Reine orders surveillance, raids, interrogations. A network begins to unravel, thread by poisonous thread. La Voisin is arrested outside of church, holding a missile in one hand and a velvet pouch in the other. Inside the pouch, a list of names. You probably don't need me to tell you whose name is on top. But here's the most chilling part. Once arrested, La Voisin talks. Then she stops. Then she talks again. She names people. Some die. Some vanish. Some, clever or connected, deny everything and escape. But the rumor about Montespan, that sticks. Like oil on silk. It won't wash out. Historians still argue whether La Voisin implicated Montespan directly, or whether her enemies in court embellished the story later. Some records are missing. Others were likely destroyed on purpose. But the core fact remains. Montespan's name was associated with this network, whether she participated in one ritual or 20. And suddenly, the king's sunlight doesn't reach quite as far as it used to. La Voisin is imprisoned at Vincennes. She receives no visitors. And then, in 1680, she's executed, burned at the stake in a public square, the smoke choking onlookers and smelling faintly of cloves and scorched wig powder. The people cheer. But you wonder what she didn't say. Because make no mistake, some names never left her lips. She protected clients. Or perhaps she protected herself. Or someone protected her, long enough to ensure she died with her secrets intact. And now, Versailles trembles, not outwardly. Outwardly, there are still banquets and minuets. But in every chamber, every drawing room, every salon, someone is wondering, who else knew? Who else paid? Who's next? Montespan, meanwhile, retreats. Just a little. No more midnight carriages. No more cryptic prayers. She refocuses on her children. On appearances. On innocence. You see her smile in the chapel. Her eyes closed in prayer. But you've seen too much now to be fooled. The poisoner is gone. But the poison still lingers in the air. You don't see the ashes, but you smell them. Versailles may be marble and mirror, but even here, the wind carries smoke from La Voisin's pyre. A whisper through the gardens, a hint on the queen's hem. a smudge of something dark beneath the perfume. And with it comes panic, because while the poisoner is dead, her records are very much not. Police have seized her ledgers, her letters, her coded notes scribbled on parchment and pressed between pages of prayer books. And the names, so many names, are beginning to surface. Not from loud proclamations, from careful leaks, gentle nudges, a comment placed just right in conversation, a name murmured into the wrong ear at the right time. Suddenly, everyone's afraid. You walk through the king's inner circle and feel it. This unnatural stillness. The courtiers laugh too loudly now, too often. Servants flinch when addressed. Pages scurry faster. It's the atmosphere of a room that doesn't know yet if it's on fire, but smells smoke anyway. One thing becomes clear. Names are currency, and everyone's worried their account is about to be overdrawn. A low-ranking nobleman, desperate to protect himself, gives up a countess. She, in turn, names 2 friends from a hunting lodge gathering. Just a little ritual, nothing serious, only for fun. The king's valet, under pressure, confirms that Madame de So-and-so was seen speaking to a street midwife. And the names keep coming. Historians still argue whether the investigations were ever truly about justice, or if they became convenient tools for cleaning house. Some of those accused were likely guilty. Others were probably just unlucky enough to have the wrong friend owe the wrong debt. Either way, the crown forms a special tribunal to handle it all. La Chambre Ardente, the burning chamber. And yes, it's as charming as it sounds. You walk into a room draped entirely in black, windows shuttered, candles flickering like nervous witnesses. 3 judges, robed and pale, sit beneath the fleur-de-lis. No trials here in the modern sense, just hearings, confessions, whispered denials, and sentences. Always the sentences. Here's your quirky tidbit. To ensure silence and secrecy, members of La Chambre Ardente were forbidden to even greet each other in public. One judge was reprimanded for nodding to a colleague too casually at a garden party. They weren't just investigating crime. They were performing dread. Back in Versailles, the panic has transformed into something stranger, a kind of politeness laced with fear. People ask fewer questions, speak more gently. You hear the word innocence dropped into conversations that have nothing to do with guilt. You pass Madame de Montespan's quarters and notice something has changed. She's still there, still dressed impeccably, still flashing that wry, lethal smile. But she's quieter now, tense. You hear her asking a maid, casually, whether old letters have been burned. You hear her tell a friend that she's been sleeping better lately. You know she's lying. So does everyone else. But no one says it out loud. Then comes the day they find the list. Folded inside an old missal, tucked behind a false panel in La Voisin's home, is a roster of names, written in an elegant but unfamiliar hand. Most are coded, but a few are shockingly clay. Nobles, officers, dames of the bedchamber, and near the top, Montespan. Again, this time, the king is told directly. What happens next is the subject of endless historical debate. Some say Louis flew into a rage. Others say he went utterly still, then asked to be left alone for several hours. There's even a fringe theory that he prayed, for the first time in months, not for France, but for his own soul. You follow him through the Hall of Mirrors that night, just as he stops before one of the enormous gilded panels. He stays at himself, at the opulence, the mythology, the man who called himself the sun, and he doesn't speak. Meanwhile, in the lower levels of the Bastille, the accused pile up. Many confess, some under torture, some out of panic. One noblewoman tries to poison herself with her own perfume vial before confessing that yes, she bought powder from a street conjurer, but it was only to give her dog a shinier coat. No one laughs. Others tell darker stories. A servant claims he helped prepare sleeping potions for his mistress's husband, who then conveniently never woke up. A priest swears he saw a baptism conducted in reverse. A former midwife describes a ritual where the child was taken away after birth and never returned. The lines between accusation and spectacle blur fast. Louis begins to withdraw, not from power, never that, but from Montespan. He stops inviting her to private dinners, stops defending her when courtiers drop her name in sentences with too long pauses. And soon, her name is whispered less out of reverence, more out of dread. She notices, of course. You watch her watching him. Each time his gaze skips over her, a tiny fracture forms. You think you hear it. A crack, like glass giving way beneath the weight of a golden empire. She starts praying more. Real prayers this time. She commissions masses, donates to convents, sends her children to religious education. But you sense it's not penance. It's insurance, a spiritual fire blanket. She knows that her name in those ledgers might never be read aloud, but it will always be known. And in a place like Versailles, knowledge is as fatal as poison. You find yourself beside the queen now, though she doesn't see you. Hardly anyone does. That's the magic of being part shadow, part witness. Marie-Therese of Austria sits in her chambers, hands folded in her lap, rosary wound tight around her fingers like a lifeline. Her lips move in quiet prayer, not just to sanctify her soul, but, you suspect, to hold her tongue. Because the queen has seen everything. She's watched her husband parade lovers through her halls like prizes at a particularly glittery livestock auction. She's heard the laughter from the king's apartments, Hayes excluded. She's noticed how her own name comes up less in conversation, replaced by nicknames and sly nods toward the favorite, Madame de Montespan. But now, the wind has changed, and the queen, always overlooked, knows what to do with silence. She listens. She hears more than most. The way the servants no longer speak openly around Montespan, the new pauses in court gossip, the sideways glances, the sudden affection for the word former when referring to the favorite. The queen says nothing. She just beads another prayer. Her ladies-in-waiting follow her lead. Lips closed, eyes alert. One drops her teacup while eavesdropping on a whisper about a name in the ledger. Another faints during Vespers, though nobody asks why. These days, fainting is safer than talking. And yet, somehow, it's not just Montespan they are afraid of. It's what Montespan represents. How close the darkness came to the throne. The Sun King himself, orbiting unknowingly around something more sinister than scandal. You trail behind Marie-Therese as she walks the garden paths with practiced serenity. She passes a statue of the Virgin, leans in, and murmurs something only the stone hears. You wonder if she's asking for justice, or revenge, or, more likely, just peace. Because while Montespan is slowly unraveling, the queen is starting to glow with something else. Quiet vindication. The affair has changed everything, even if no one says it aloud. Louis no longer invites Montespan into his private box at the opera. Her carriages still arrive, but later. She no longer leads conversation at the king's table. Even her once famous perfumes seem to linger shorter in the halls. The queen notices. She doesn't gloat. That would be improper, but she does smile more, faintly, as if reminded that time is patient and justice doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes it wears a gown and carries rosary beads. Here's your quirky tidbit. Marie-Therese reportedly had a personal confessor who kept a written sin ledger for her, which may or may not have included the emotional damage caused by sharing her husband with half the noblewomen of France. Some historians claim she once asked if passive-aggressive glances could count as mortal sins. If so, Versailles was a cathedral of the damned. And while she watches, The investigation continues. The Chambre Ardente summons more names. Some are minor nobles, others, former courtiers, even a few clergy. You sit in the back of the chamber as one woman sobs her confession. She describes an underground ritual involving candles, red cloth, and a roasted dove. Everyone pretends not to notice the detail about the dove's beak being sewn shut. La Reine, the king's top investigator, keeps a straight face. His heard was. And what of Louis? You watch him from afar, seated in his study beneath a ceiling painted with Apollo and the Muses. The papers before him are not war reports or garden plans. They are transcripts, summaries, names. He reads slowly. He doesn't cry, of course. Kings don't cry, but he does stay out the window longer than usual, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. You can almost hear his thoughts. How did this happen? Did I know? Should I have known? Historians still argue whether Louis truly believed Montespan was guilty. Some say he dismissed the idea outright, considering it an attack on his judgment. Others claim he was shattered, but too proud to admit it publicly. There's even speculation that he ordered some documents destroyed before they could implicate her fully. What we do know is that the Queen gained favor in these years. Not politically, spiritually. Louis began attending more Mass. He began speaking more with Madame de Maintenon, his pious, unobtrusive confidant. The shift was quiet but unmistakable. And Madame de Montespan, she stayed. Not banished, not tried, but sidelined. She remained in Versailles for years after the scandal broke. Still beautiful, still formidable, but no longer at the center. Her role became ornamental. Her power, faded lace. You visit her room one evening. She sits alone, embroidering something. Roses. You think, though the thread is so dark it's hard to tell. Her smile is soft, her expression unreadable. She's not broken, but she is quieter. She no longer visits the chapel. At least, not when anyone might see her. When the Queen walks past her in the corridor, Montespan curtsies deeply, deeper than etiquette requires. The Queen nods and keeps walking. You think you see her lips move. Amen. It's not over. Not yet. But something has shifted. Versailles is a place of rituals, and the rituals are changing. Prayers now outnumber potions. Scandal retreats behind confessionals. And for the first time in years, the Queen is no longer just an accessory in the king's story. She's a character. And Montespan, well, she's still here. But for how long? You're back in the king's chambers now, though not much happens here anymore after dark. Louis XIV has grown quieter. Not in voice. He still makes grand declarations, still hosts splendid events, but quieter in his private soul. You watch him sit by the window, parchment in hand, though the ink dries untouched. The same man who once danced the lead in his own ballets now seems oddly still, as if the weight of light has finally tired him out. You remember when this room echoed with Montespan's laughter, when she'd sweep in like a storm made of velvet and wit, scattering courtiers with a flick of her fan. Now, it's just Louis, and silence, and the knowledge that someone, maybe everyone, has been lying. The air is different, not just somber, suspicious. Louis has started to notice things. The way certain noblemen excuse themselves at the same hour every Thursday. The curious little pouches tucked into gloves. The priests who cross themselves twice after blessing a chamber. He doesn't say anything, not at first, but you can feel his patience stretching. The affair of the poisons isn't just some tangled mess in Paris anymore. It's here. It's under him, under his throne, under his very skin. And so, he begins to act. Quietly, yes, but deliberately. He orders new investigators to cross-reference names from La Voisin's ledger with palace records. He creates a separate, secret list. Only he sees it. Not even La Reine, who by now has interrogated half of France, is allowed to know all of it. You peek at the list. Yes, her name is still there. Montespan, still near the top. But her name is joined by others now. Friends, allies, people who once sat beside the king at dinner and now find themselves excluded from invitations. One noblewoman arrives to a ball and finds her name missing from the guest list. Another is quietly encouraged to take a sabbatical to her country estate. Yet another flees to England altogether, under the pretense of health. Something has caught fire, and it's spreading through the palace without flames. Historians still argue whether this phase was truly about rooting out danger, or simply controlling the narrative. Because Louis, ever the stage manager of his own legend, cannot allow the world to think his court was overrun by witches and murderers. So he does what monarchs do best. He controls the damage. He starts leaking new policies instead of new arrests. New ordinances are passed, tightening restrictions on apothecaries and street healers. Anyone caught selling unnatural substances without official license faces imprisonment. Magical rites, outlawed. Fortune-telling, criminalized. Suddenly, Paris looks less like a market for dreams and more like a city under quiet inquisition. Here's your fringe fact. The king authorized a secret prison facility to house suspects who couldn't be publicly tried, because to try them would be to name names. These were known as lettres de cachet, sealed orders of imprisonment without trial. Some prisoners remained locked away for decades, their only crime being too well connected to expose. The investigations widen, but so does the unease. Versailles is no longer shimmering. It's twitching. The court is restless. Jokes have teeth. Gossip cuts deep. And beneath all this, Montespan is unraveling. She doesn't show it in the obvious ways. She still dresses magnificently, still smiles in the queen's direction as if daring her to flinch, but you notice the change. She walks alone more often. Her letters are shorter, her laughter less spontaneous. She watches Madame de Maintenon with growing resentment, knowing the woman's rise comes as her own decline becomes irreversible. You trail Montespan one evening down a lesser hallway, a place she never used to visit. She pauses before a private chapel, one rarely entered by courtiers. She doesn't go in, just stands there, eyes distant, fingers tightening around a fan she never opens. She whispers a name. You don't hear it clearly, but it's not the king's. Back in the throne room, Louis makes another quiet move. He instructs that the Chambre Ardente be dissolved. Its work is complete, he says, but you and everyone else know better. It's not about completion, it's about containment. And with that, the door shuts. Dozens of prisoners are transferred or simply vanish from records. Some are released, others are not. One disappears en route to exile. Another dies mysteriously in her cell. The judges are thanked for their service. Their ledgers are filed somewhere. As for the poisonous, well, no more are executed. Not officially, but their stories remain, and their stains. You pass a young courtier whispering about a marquis whose teeth fell out after dining with the wrong duchess. Another tells the tale of a handkerchief laced with powder that made a general forget his own name for 3 days. Most of these are exaggerated, probably, but no one wants to test them. The palace feels like a place purged, but not cleansed. Louis begins attending mass more regularly. He walks with Maintenon in the gardens, talking softly. Sometimes he pauses by a rose bush and says nothing at all. You watch him from a distance, wondering what he thinks about when he's alone. The Sun King has begun to cast longer shadows, and those shadows whisper. They whisper that power, when mixed with fear, becomes corrosive. That love, when held too tightly, curdles, and that courts, no matter how gilded, are always half a step from the gallows. And somewhere, behind a closed door, Montespan coughs into a handkerchief that she quickly tucks away. No one asks if there's blood on it, because some questions are better left unanswered. You hear the sound before you see the scene. The rattle of carriage wheels over cobblestones, unusually heavy footfall for a morning in Versailles, and the unmistakable hush that follows news no one dares repeat aloud. Arrests are being made, but not with fanfare, not with trumpets or shouting. These are noble arrests, which means discretion served on a silver platter. You peek through an arched gallery window and catch the tail end of a lady's silk train disappearing into a covered cart. No crest, no ceremony. Just two guards and a valet who looks like he wishes he were anywhere else. The king has decided to act, finally, but not loudly. That would be bad for the brand. The accused are taken in pairs or one at a time, summoned politely for conversations, and then never seen again at dinner. At first, the court assumes it's a trend. Someone's being punished for fashion blasphemy or a minor political misstep. But when the Countess de Soissons is arrested while mid-curtsy to the Duchess of Orleans, and no one returns her fan, people begin to panic. You trail behind two guards as they escort a trembling woman through a hidden hallway toward a carriage door. She's not crying, yet. She's calculating. Who knows what? Who saw what? Which of her acquaintances is now her greatest threat? Versailles, at this point, is a palace turned chessboard. Every friendship, every alliance is now suspect, because everyone knows someone who visited La Voisin. You see a footman refuse to accept a sealed letter. A maid breaks down after seeing her employer's name scratched out of a dinner list. Even the king's personal barber reportedly shaves in silence now. The usual court banter replaced by the quiet realization that poison can travel through powder puffs as easily as it does in wine. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some nobles, terrified of being accused, began testing their wine on pet animals before drinking. One marquis even kept a squirrel named Nicholas for that exact purpose. Nicholas was eventually knighted, probably as a joke. But in these times, you really couldn't be sure. The court is unraveling politely. Outfits are still impeccable. Dinners still happen. But the music sounds off. One harpist is dismissed for playing a tune associated with a noblewoman just arrested. Coincidence? Maybe. But he now plays at garden parties in Lyon. And the Chambre Ardente, though officially dissolved, its legacy lingers. The records are sealed, or rather, buried under layers of royal discretion. But a few pages make their way through back channels. You find one, half-burned, slipped between the pages of a hymnal in the palace chapel. It lists ingredients found in a noblewoman's dressing table drawer. A powdered toad bone, a dried belladonna root, love ash, unidentified source. You blink, and then read the margin note beside it. Recommended by the widow Leroux. Paid 16 livres. La Reine, though no longer spearheading the grand investigation, continues quietly. He interviews servants, reviews past statements, connects dots others missed. Is no longer looking to convict. Is looking to contain. Because the truth, whatever it is, would be too damaging. Historians still argue whether the king knew the full scope of what was uncovered. Did he read every testimony? Did he listen to the details of the black masses, of Montespan's alleged prayers for the death of rivals? Or did he deliberately stop at the edge of the abyss and look away? What we know is this: the arrests slow, then stop. Some accused are released under house arrest. Others disappear into silent confinement under the lettres de cachet, those sealed orders that required no trial, no announcement, just obedience. Louis begins issuing new court protocols. Public morality becomes fashionable. He praises Madame de Maintenon for her piety, even invites theologians for dinner discussions, which, honestly, is as close as Versailles gets to spiritual revival. Powdered wigs and psalms, redemption served with Petit's farce. Montespan is still here. Somehow, she hasn't been arrested, hasn't been exiled, hasn't even been officially questioned. But you can see it in her eyes. She's waiting. She stops attending salons, stops hosting late-night suppers. Her apartments remain furnished. Flowers still arrive each morning. But she herself, shrinking, like someone folding in on herself, thread by thread. One morning, you watch her in the hall of mirrors, alone. She gazes into her reflection, touches the glass gently, as though checking for cracks in her own image. And then she whispers, "He doesn't look at me anymore." It's not a confession. It's an obituary. The court knows, of course. But no one dares speak the truth outright. Instead, they fill the space with a newer narrative. The king is maturing. He favors more respectable company. Montespan is unwell. And you? You float through it all, invisible and alert, watching the transformation unfold. Versailles, once the stage for indulgence and excess, is beginning to self-correct, like a body purging poison. But what's left behind isn't health, it's trauma. No one trusts anyone. Friendships are laced with suspicion. Flattery lands with a thud. Even the queen, now riding high on divine favor, keeps her answers short and her door locked at night. The nobles arrested in silk and powder. They are barely spoken of now. Their names are wiped from invitations, their portraits removed from gallery walls. But you remember them. You saw their faces in the candlelight. You watched them cry as their worlds collapsed in silence. And somewhere, buried in the archives, are their letters. Pleas, confessions, bargains. Dust doesn't erase guilt. It just softens it. You're in a new room now. It smells of ink and old wool, not perfume and flower water. The heat here doesn't come from gossip. It comes from the stacks of parchment, warmed by candles and weighed down with consequence. Welcome to the Chambre Ardente, still burning, if only in memory. The judges are gone. Yes, the trials are over, officially. But the chamber's influence has soaked into the very bones of Versailles. You walk through its former location, stripped of its black drapes now, just another quiet wing, and you swear you can still hear whispers. Confessions echo longer than trumpets. Though the official door has closed, the work continues underground. Secret testimonies are filed. Prisoners are questioned behind locked doors. Every new whisper brings a new document, sealed in wax, labeled with initials and warnings. Not every page survives, but some do. You peek at one. The handwriting is frantic, the parchment slightly singed at the corner. It begins, "I only wanted his affection." You don't need a signature to know who wrote it. Madame de Montespan is no longer summoned. She's no longer sought out. She's no longer dangerous. But her past, that still smolders. Meanwhile, investigators continue cataloging the mess. It turns out Lavoisin's network was larger than anyone thought. She was the spider, yes, but the web stretches all the way to noble salons, royal bedrooms, and cathedral crypts. Poisons disguised as beauty bombs. Letters written in lemon juice to disappear when heated. Servants trained to nod in code. Everything had a system, and that system took years to dismantle. Here's your quirky fringe detail. One midwife confessed to keeping a blessed ash spoon, used to stir poisons while reciting prayers backward. She claimed it increased potency and reduced guilt. You're not sure about the science, but it sounds like something you'd find in the Versailles gift shop, next to the cursed lace fans. At court, everyone is aware that justice was selective. Not everyone who deserved to fall did. Some escaped punishment entirely. Others were punished for simply knowing too much. And some, like Montespan, floated in that strange, unspoken limbo between guilt and untouchability. Historians still argue whether Montespan's name was deliberately scrubbed from official documents. Some believe Louis ordered it himself to avoid public humiliation. Others think the omission was a result of loyalists within the court protecting her even after her fall. After all, Montespan had friends in many places, and enemies who liked their heads attached. The records of the Chambre Ardente are now locked away in archives, portions of them destroyed during later reigns. But what remains paints a haunting portrait, a court so desperate for power and affection that it reached into the darkest corners of belief and chemistry to get it. And still, Versailles carries on. Balls resume. Operas are performed. Painters return to their portraits of powdered perfection. But everything feels quieter, heavier. You can tell which courtiers were named in testimony by the way they blink when the candles go out. You attend one final interrogation. Not public. No sentence. Just a quiet conversation in a candlelit cell. The accused, a former page, describes his role in passing letters between noble women and street witches. He was paid in coins, sure, but sometimes in leftover desserts or second-hand waistcoats. He didn't understand what he was delivering, he says. He never opened a single envelope. Then he adds, softly, but I knew something was wrong when I smelled sulfur every time. That's the line that sticks with you, because sulfur, burnt and sharp, seems to hang in the air long after the scandal itself is over. You smell it in Montespan's apartments, though she's lit no fire. You smell it in Louis's library, clinging to sealed letters he never opens. And you smell it in the eyes of Madame de Maintenon. Yes, she's rising now. Quietly, reverently. She has the king's trust, his ear, maybe even his heart. But she steps with care, as if the stones beneath her feet might still be poisoned. She never speaks of Montespan, never mentions the scandal, never allows herself a smack. But you notice that her prayers are longer these days, and her door, always closed at night. One morning, a new edict is posted, stricter control of Parisian midwives. All births must be registered, all herbalists licensed, all masses, especially private ones, supervised. It's framed as a public health measure, but you know better. It's a memory management plan. The king is rebuilding, not the walls of Versailles, but the reputation. This scandal cannot define his reign, so it's being buried, quietly, elegantly, like a body in a silk-lined coffin. Still, the rumors don't die. You hear one that says Montespan keeps a small chest beneath her bed, filled with relics from the Black Masses. Another says she tried to poison Maintenon, but the potion was intercepted by a suspicious nun. And another, more poetic than probable, claims Montespan prays nightly for the return of Louis's affection, and that her voice is sometimes heard echoing from the walls of the chapel long after she's left. None of these are proven. All of them are believed, because when a court is built on spectacle and secrecy, even truth becomes theatrical. And you keep moving through the palace, noting who walks faster now, who avoids eye contact, who no longer speaks to their oldest friends. The poison may be gone, but the paranoia, that's forever. By now, Versailles is trying very hard to forget. It's polishing its mirrors, replanting its rose gardens, commissioning new portraits that depict serenity and sunlight. But you know better. You've walked its hidden corridors, listened at its velvet doors. You've seen the stains behind the gilding, and nowhere is this desperation to forget more visible than in Madame de Montespan's gilded exile. She hasn't been banished, not officially. There are no proclamations, no carriage rides into the wilderness with weeping attendants. She's still here, tucked into her royal apartment, her name still on the mouths of courtiers, though now whispered, and often with a sigh. But for all intents and purposes, she's been erased from the king's inner circle. It's like watching someone be painted out of their own portrait, one delicate brushstroke at a time. You pass by her salon. The curtains are drawn more often now. The musicians she once hired have moved on to other patrons. Her famous gatherings, once a magnet for poets, philosophers, and scandal chasers, have dissolved into stiff, awkward teas where no one really knows what to say. And Montespan herself, you find her sitting by the fire, eyes unfocused, her embroidery unfinished in her lap. She doesn't look defeated, just paused, like she's waiting for the next scene in a play that may no longer include her. Occasionally, she still dresses for the king, but the king doesn't come. He's with Madame de Maintenon now, quiet, composed, devout. The opposite of everything Montespan once wielded like a weapon. You'd think that would make Montespan angrier, but she doesn't rage. Not anymore. There's a certain chill in her calm now, and something bitter beneath the powdered sweetness. You listen in one day as she speaks to her confessor. She says, "I loved him more than I feared God." There's silence. Then she laughs, soft and humorless. "And now I fear both." Here's your quirky fringe detail. Montespan, in her final years at court, reportedly took to carrying a small bottle of blessed salt tied in a ribbon to her corset. Some say it was for spiritual protection. Others said she was worried Maintenon might start cooking. Historians still argue whether her exile was self-imposed, strategic, or the result of quiet royal nudges. Some say Louis wanted her gone but couldn't bear the public spectacle. Others claim she left to preserve what remained of her dignity. There's even debate over whether Maintenon personally insisted on her removal. Politely, of course, with all the grace of a woman pouring poison into teacups made of prayer. But the effect is the same. You no longer see Montespan beside the king at events. She doesn't ride out with the royal party. Her name disappears from bulletins and court records. Even her letters are signed with increasing formality, as if she's begun writing herself into a new version of her life. And yet, she's still here, still watching, still listening, still remembering, because memory is her only weapon now. And oh, what a collection she has. She begins visiting convents, not to stay, not yet, but to observe. She attends masses more frequently. She donates to orphanages, commissions prayers for her late children. The courtiers call it repentance. You're not sure. It feels more like strategy, like she's preparing for a final act. Louis, for his part, avoids her. He sends money, arranges for her children's education, ensures she's cared for, but he does not call on her, does not write. It's as if he's rewritten his own past, one where Montespan never existed, or at least never mattered quite so much. And yet, you catch him watching her once, from a gallery window. She's crossing the garden alone, her posture still proud. He doesn't speak, just watches. You wonder if he's remembering the letters she used to send him, the perfumed ones, the ones with the ink that never quite dried. You'd like to believe there's remorse in his gaze, but you know it's more complicated than that. Versailles itself seems to mourn her in small ways. The salon where her portrait once hung is now bare. A favorite fountain has stopped flowing. A parrot she once gifted to the queen refuses to speak anymore, which some say is symbolic. Others say it's just old. Still, symbolism works over time, hey. By this point, Montespan's children with Louis have grown, legitimized, and set on paths of status and decorum. Their mother's name is spoken carefully, reverently in private, rarely in public. The children know enough not to ask too many questions, but you suspect they sometimes do anyway. One night, you find her alone in the royal chapel, long after the last bell has rung. She kneels, hands trembling just slightly, mouthing words you cannot hear. Behind her, the shadows of saints stretch across marble like elongated regrets. She doesn't see you, but if she did, you think she'd not. Not in greeting, in warning. Because if power built Versailles, then silence keeps it standing. and hers has become the loudest silence of them all. You follow the sound of flickering candlelight, not just the flame, but the movement of it, like it's trying to say something no one dares speak aloud. You're not in a chapel, though it feels like one. You're in the drawing rooms and salons of Versailles, where poison has become political currency. It's quieter now, sure. The scandals have stopped making headlines, and the carriages of arrested nobles no longer trundle out through the palace gates in the early morning fog. But the residue, it lingers, because poison, as it turns out, was never just about murder. It was about maneuvering, about nudging someone out of the king's favor, about making a rival sick for just long enough to miss an important fate, about leaving someone vulnerable to embarrassment, ruin, or exile. It wasn't always about death. It was about distance. And here in Versailles, distance from the king is death enough. You slip between card tables and overhear a baron say, "She was radiant until that cough started." Coincidence? His friend doesn't laugh. No one laughs at jokes like that anymore. Not since a duchess fell ill after switching bedrooms with her cousin. Not since a count lost his eyesight for 2 days after sipping the wrong cordial. These days, courtiers don't toast each other. They watch the drinks be poured from start to finish. They carry little charms sewn into their pockets. They inspect sugar cubes like detectives. And still, the court plays on. Louis XIV, by now, has leaned fully into a public image of control. He is pious, deliberate, older. His trading flirtation for legacy, favoring order over indulgence. His relationship with Madame de Maintenon is steady, nearly clerical in its discretion. But beneath the calm, something else simmers. Because now he knows what they are capable of. Not just women like Montespan or Lavoisin, but everyone. Friends, ministers, bishops, the people who smiled in his presence and plotted under cover of darkness. It's made him sharper, more guarded. You watch him scanning the room longer before speaking, pausing a beat longer before choosing a word. He's not afraid, just aware. Historians still argue whether Louis used the affair of the poisons to eliminate enemies or simply contain chaos. But the result is the same. He begins wielding punishment like perfume, light, fragrant, and deadly in quantity. He uses lettres de cachet with increasing precision, not to draw blood, but to disappear threats. A noble woman too curious about an old ledger, dispatched to her country estate. A valet caught exchanging notes with a disgraced physician, reassigned to a remote post in Gascony. No charges, no trials, just moved. It's terrifying in its elegance. And it works. People fall back into line. They smile harder, bow lower. No one wants to be the next person whose name is quietly inked onto a parchment and locked in a drawer with a royal seal. You follow Madame de Maintenon now. She glides through this environment like it's a convent, not a court. She doesn't engage in gossip, doesn't offer favors. Her power lies in not participating. That, ironically, gives her influence beyond any mistress before her. People project safety onto her, decency, cleanliness, and she uses that perception like a scalpel. Maintenon doesn't need poison. She is the antidote, or at least, that's the version the court prefers. Whether she truly despised Montespan or simply played the long game of quiet influence, you'll never know. She's too good. But sometimes, you catch her looking toward Montespan's old apartments. Not fondly, just evaluating. Here's your quirky detail. Versailles architects reportedly redesigned parts of the palace layout after the scandal to create more open visibility in servant corridors. It was a surveillance tactic, reduce secrets by reducing shadows. Of course, nobles simply moved their secrets to private gardens and locked wardrobes. But still, the wallpaper got prettier. The king orders new portraits, himself, radiant and unbothered. The court follows suit. Everyone wants to be painted looking serene, wise, untouched by scandal. You walk through one salon filled with these faces, all powdered and polished, pretending they never sniffed a sachet of mysterious herbs or passed a vial under a fan. But you remember the midwife who named nobles while her hands shook. You remember the priest who described a black mass with tears in his beard. You remember the servant who kept a tally of who visited La Voisin, not for justice, but for leverage. All of it still exists, buried under the gold trim of the cart. One morning, the king publicly praises his ministers for restoring moral clarity. Everyone claps. A bishop nods solemnly. A marquise dabs at imaginary tears. But later, you pass a different scene. Two footmen stand behind the queen's garden wall. One hands the other a small envelope. It disappears into a vest pocket. No words, just a nod. You know the pattern. Some things never change. The new court morality is all theater. Useful, beautiful, but underneath it, there's still maneuvering. There are still secrets, and there are still potions. Fewer now, yes. More hidden, less flamboyant. But don't be fooled by the incense and stained glass reflections. Versailles is a place that learned the value of discretion the hard way. And now, poison has simply changed its form. It's not in vials anymore. It's in favors. It's in rumors. It's in who gets invited and who doesn't. And as you drift past another room where two noble women lean in too close, whispering over wine neither has sipped yet, you realize something else. The court doesn't need La Voisin anymore. It learned to do her work all on its own. The halls feel lighter now, but only because everyone is holding their breath. Versailles has adopted a new rhythm. It is quieter, yes, but not restful. It's the silence that follows thunder, when the earth still shivers and the clouds haven't quite cleared. And Louis XIV is not rebuilding from ruin. His rebranding from revelation. You pass the king in his council chamber, surrounded by ministers who nod too often and smile too thinly. The king listens more than he speaks now, a shift that unnerves everyone. Louis, once so radiant in his certainty, has grown reflective, not regretful. He'd never admit that, but aware that not even the sun is immune to shadows. This is the era of reform. At least, that's what they're calling it. New laws appear like fresh wallpaper. Edicts against unlicensed healers, restrictions on midwives, the forced registration of births and baptisms. The word decency is suddenly on everyone's lips. The phrase moral realignment appears in official letters. What it really means is, let's never speak of that again. You attend a sermon given in the royal chapel. The priest, sweating slightly under his robes, preaches on the danger of invisible sins and temptations masked as affection. Half the court stays at the floor. The other half stays at the queen, who stares at nothing. Everyone knows who the message is for, and everyone pretends they don't. Even Madame de Montespan, still present, still titled, sits through the sermon with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, a faint line of tension etched around her mouth. She doesn't flinch. She never flinches. But her fan doesn't move the entire hour. You sit beside her, invisible, as always. Her eyes are fixed on the altar, but you can tell her thoughts are elsewhere, probably in that cellar, or with that priest, or maybe with La Voisin, whose ashes have long since scattered, but whose presence lingers in every cautious conversation. Here's your fringe fact for this chapter. In the aftermath of the poison trials, Versailles installed an unofficial watch list for incoming courtiers. Newcomers were vetted not just for lineage or loyalty, but for any association, however minor, with alchemy, astrology, or herbal medicine. One poor nobleman was nearly turned away for having written a treatise on the medicinal properties of mint. Meanwhile, Madame de Maintenon grows stronger. Not in volume, she still rarely speaks at court functions, but in position. Her influence over the king has become so established that courtiers now seek her favor as they once sought Montespan's. She receives letters, visitors, small offerings of fruit and embroidered handkerchiefs. She responds with grace and silence. It's not clear when the shift happened, only that it is now complete. Montespan, once the sun around which the court revolved, has become a cautionary tale performed in whispers. Maintenon is the new standard, modest, composed, unshakably pious. But let's not pretend she's naive. She knows what she replaced. You watch her glance across the room at Montespan during a royal supper. Their eyes meet, only for a second. It's not cruel. It's not cold. It's just final. Louis speaks to neither woman during the meal. He smiles at his courtiers, lifts a golden goblet, and drinks without hesitation. You note the murmurs of approval. The drink was served openly, poured in plain view. Just in case anyone forgot, the king is no longer afraid. Or at least, is pretending not to be. Behind the scenes, the mechanisms of control have tightened. Spies are more prevalent now, though no one uses that word. Correspondents, perhaps. Monitors. Servants with excellent hearing and vague job descriptions. The royal post is checked more carefully. Invitations are curated with surgical precision. And still, there are incidents. A nobleman faints mid-dance. A young lady vomits during morning mass. A physician claims it's stress. Everyone else claims it's déjà vu. Historians still argue whether the court ever truly moved on from the poison scandal. Officially, yes, the laws were passed, the criminals burned or buried. But emotionally, Versailles never fully recovered. It learned to smile through gritted teeth. You wander the hall of mirrors again. It looks the same. Perfect. Impossibly clean. But you know how many secrets these walls have heard. You pause before one particular pane, the one where Montespan once stood, whispering her regrets to her own reflection. Now it shows nothing but you. One final, quiet irony. After everything, after the potions, the prayers, the rituals and ruins, Montespan is never publicly condemned. Her name is never read aloud in connection with the affair of the poisons. She is never charged, never tried, never punished, but she is erased. The court speaks of her less each day. When her name is used, it's in past tense. A reference, a memory, the ghost of a scandal everyone's agreed to forget, even while the perfume of it clings to their cuffs. Versailles is washed now, but not clean. The tapestries have been rehung. The court has put on its pouted smile. The king has resumed his divine posture. But you, who have seen what was whispered behind those fans and dripped into those goblets, know better. And so does everyone else. They just won't say it. Not anymore. And just like that, the whispers start to fade. They don't vanish, of course. Versailles doesn't work that way. It digests its scandals slowly, like a snake curled around a too large meal. But eventually, even poison loses its sting, replaced by new distractions, fresh faces, shifting alliances. That's how power works here. Through forgetting, or at least pretending to. You walk the halls as the seasons change. The marble feels warmer, somehow. The gold seems shinier. The fountains spray a little higher, as if trying to drown out the memories embedded in every ripple. Madame de Montespan has left Versailles. She departs quietly, without fanfare. No crowd gathers to wave. No tears are spilled. She retires to a convent, a voluntary exile. The story goes. She writes letters, receives visits from her children, prays a great deal. But you know what she's really doing? Surviving. Retelling her version of events to herself until it fits. Her exit is neither disgrace nor redemption. It's just absence. The court breathes easier without her. There's less tension in the salons now. Fewer glances cast over crystal goblets. People say they are relieved. That decency has returned. That the darkness is behind us. But they still check their wine. And they still glance twice at any woman who walks alone after dark with a satchel tucked under her arm. Madame de Maintenon, now firmly beside the king, perhaps even married to him, depending on which whisper you believe, rules not with flirtation but with silence. She promotes schools for girls, sponsors pious charities, and encourages simplicity in fashion. She also speaks very little of Montespan, and never of Lavoisin. You'd almost think none of it happened. Almost. Here's your final quirky tidbit. After her retirement, Montespan was said to have ordered hundreds of masses said for her soul, including some for those I may have harmed in thought. Whether that was repentance or theater, we'll never know. But if anyone knew how to perform for an audience, seen or unseen, it was her. And what of Louis? He lives on, of course. Older, slower, but still the Sun King. Still ruling, still admired, but quieter now, too. He no longer floats openly. He attends Mass with more devotion. His gaze lingers longer on the chapel ceiling than on the dancers' hems. Some say he never spoke Montespan's name again. Others say he whispered it in his sleep. Historians still argue whether the affair of the poisons truly ended in 1682, or whether it simply shifted shape into law, into surveillance, into new forms of control. What's certain is this: the scandal left scars, not just on the courtiers who survived it, but on the court itself. Versailles emerged more orderly, more moral, and infinitely more afraid. Because once you've seen how easily trust turns to toxin, you never sip quite the same again. You drift now through the king's private study, where the fire crackles softly and a faint scent of ink and candle wax lingers in the air. The king's writing desk is empty. The room is still. Somewhere far off, a harpsichord plays a tired song. There's no poison left here. Only memory. Only echoes. Only a court that learned what happens when ambition meets desperation in the dead of night. You're still here. You've followed every footstep through marble halls and midnight gardens. You've heard the chants behind locked chapel doors and the laughter that came with too much perfume. You've watched as power shimmered, soured, and then vanished, one exhale at a time. Now, the palace is quiet. Versailles sleeps. The scandal has passed, at least on paper. But you know better. You've seen the layers. You know that history doesn't disappear. It settles, like dust on embroidered cushions, waiting to be disturbed. Montespan is gone. Lavoisin burned. The king has aged. The mirrors reflect different faces now. But the shadows, they remain. So you take one last look. The candles are low. The garden beyond the windows is pale in the moonlight. Somewhere in the distance, a nightingale sings, soft, uncertain, like even it knows some stories never really end. It's time to drift away from this gilded world. Let the whispers quiet. Let the perfume fade. You've been a part of something secret tonight, something most would never admit to knowing. You've walked through danger wrapped in lace, and you've emerged calm, thoughtful, maybe even a little wary. That's good. It means you were paying attention. Now, close your eyes. Let the court fall behind you. Let the ghosts take care of themselves. And when you dream, if you dream, perhaps remember that not all poison comes in bottles. Some of it wears silken smiles. Good night. Sleep well.